Last night changed something people thought was untouchable. Iran didn't just fire missiles. It didn't just send drones. It aimed straight at the one place Israel tries hardest to keep normal, Ben Gurion Airport. And for the first time in decades, Israel's national airline, El Al, was forced to cancel regular scheduled flights. Not a delay, not a reroute, a full suspension of normal operations under wartime restrictions. That's the headline. But the real story is not about one airport. It's about what happens when a war stops feeling distant and starts interfering with daily life in a way people can't ignore. Because when an airport like Ben Gurion gets hit, or even just consistently threatened, you're not just attacking infrastructure. You're attacking rhythm. And once rhythm breaks, everything else starts to wobble. Now let's anchor this clearly, because this is where most people get confused. Iran has claimed attacks targeting Ben Gurion Airport using long-range drones and missiles as part of its ongoing escalation with Israel. At the same time, Israeli authorities imposed strict flight limitations, airlines suspended operations, and El Al canceled its regular scheduled flights due to security restrictions and operational constraints. That's the concrete situation. Not total destruction, not a smoking crater. Something more subtle, and in some ways more dangerous. Disruption. And this matters for three reasons. First, it shows that even heavily defended airspace can be pressured enough to disrupt civilian aviation. Second, it turns a national symbol into a vulnerability. And third, it forces a psychological shift, where people stop asking, "Are we safe?" and start asking, "How long can this stay normal?" That's the real shift. Let's start with the first reason, because this is where most people misunderstand what hitting an airport actually means in modern war. They imagine a direct strike, massive destruction, total shutdown. But that's not how pressure works anymore. Today, you don't need to destroy an airport to break it. You just need to make it unsafe enough that operations become unreliable. And that's exactly what's happening. Ben Gurion hasn't just been targeted once. It's been under repeated pressure, missile threats, drone threats, debris damage, flight restrictions, and constant uncertainty. Even intercepted missiles have caused damage to aircraft and forced new safety rules, including limiting flights and passenger numbers. That's the example. Even when defenses work, the system still gets stressed. Flights get delayed, airlines pull out, passengers cancel, and suddenly, the airport is technically open, but functionally compromised. Here's the punchline. In modern warfare, you don't need to break the system. You just need to make the system hesitate. And once aviation hesitates, everything connected to it starts feeling the pressure. Now let's move to the second reason, because this is where the story becomes bigger than aviation. Ben Gurion is not just an airport. It's Israel's main gateway to the world. It's where business flows in, where families leave and return, where tourism begins, where international connection feels real. And when that place becomes unstable, the message spreads far beyond the runway. We're already seeing it. International airlines have stopped flying. Thousands of passengers are stranded. Travel seasons are disrupted. And even when limited flights operate, they're tightly controlled, reduced, and constantly at risk of interruption. That's not just inconvenience. That's signal. Because airports are emotional infrastructure. They represent movement, freedom, connection, control. And when people see that even the most important airport in the country can't operate normally, it changes how they feel about everything else. Here's the punchline for reason 2. You don't attack an airport to destroy planes. You attack it to make a country feel cut off. And that feeling spreads faster than any missile ever could. Now let's get to the third reason, because this is where it becomes strategic. This isn't just about Iran hitting Israel. It's about Iran forcing Israel to defend normal life under constant pressure. That's a completely different kind of war, because military bases expect to be targeted. Air defense systems expect to be tested. But civilian systems, especially something as visible as a national airport, are supposed to feel protected, predictable, stable. And when they don't, the entire narrative of control starts to crack. This is where the psychological layer kicks in. Because even if most threats are intercepted, even if most damage is limited, even if the system is still technically functioning, the public doesn't experience percentages. They experience moments. Sirens, canceled flights, grounded planes, uncertainty. And that creates a new question in people's minds. Not did we stop it, but can this keep happening? That's a much harder question to answer. Here's the punchline for reason 3. When normal life becomes the battlefield, winning becomes harder to define. Now, let's be fair for a second, because this is where a lot of viral takes go wrong. This does not mean Israeli defenses have failed. It does not mean Iran has some unstoppable weapon. And it does not mean the airport is permanently shut down. Israel still has layered air defense. It still intercepts a large percentage of incoming threats. And it still maintains operational control. That's important, because without that context, the story turns into exaggeration. And exaggeration kills credibility. But here's the uncomfortable truth that sits right in the middle. Defense doesn't have to fail completely to feel like it's under strain. That's the nuance most people miss. Because the real effect here is not total failure. It's growing friction. And friction is expensive. Every incoming drone requires tracking. Every missile requires interception. Every alert disrupts activity. Every restriction slows movement. And every disruption chips away at confidence. That adds up. Now zoom out for a second, because this is where everything connects. Iran is not trying to win a traditional war against Israel or the US head-on. That's not the game. The game is pressure. Pressure on defense systems. Pressure on infrastructure. Pressure on alliances. Pressure on public confidence. And Ben Gurion Airport is a perfect pressure point, because it sits right at the intersection of everything that matters. Security, economy, mobility, symbolism. And when you pressure something that's central, the effects multiply. That's why this matters beyond one strike. Because this is not about a single event. It's about a pattern. Missiles, drones, repeated targeting, flight disruptions, airline withdrawals, operational limits. Each one on its own is manageable. Together, they create something else. A slow erosion of normalcy. And that's the real weapon here. Not just drones, not just missiles, but uncertainty. Because uncertainty forces decisions. Airlines pull out to avoid risk. Governments tighten restrictions. Passengers cancel plans. Businesses adjust operations. And suddenly, without a single decisive blow, the system starts behaving differently. That's strategic impact. Now here's something even more important. This isn't the first time Ben Gurion has been threatened. It's been targeted before. It's been shut down before. But what makes this moment different is the consistency of pressure. The feeling that it's not a one-off event. That it can happen again, and again, and again. That repetition changes everything. Because people can tolerate disruption once. They struggle with repeated disruption. And that's exactly where long conflicts become dangerous. Not because of one big moment, but because of many small ones that keep stacking. Now let's bring this down to one clear takeaway. Iran didn't just hit an airport. It hit the idea that certain parts of life can stay untouched by war. And once that idea breaks, the psychological battlefield expands. That's what we're seeing right now. Not total collapse. Not total control. Something in between. A system still standing, but under visible pressure. And that's the hardest kind of situation to manage. Because it forces leaders to answer questions that don't have clean answers. How much disruption is acceptable? How long can this continue? What counts as success? And how do you keep people feeling secure when the threat keeps adapting? Those are the questions that define the next phase of this conflict. Not just missiles, not just drones, but resilience. So here's the final question for you. If a country can keep functioning, but normal life keeps getting interrupted, is that still control? Or is that the beginning of something else?